This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this StockBox interview.
Joining us today is Tony Hamilton, the CEO of Georgina Energy. Tony, good to be catching up with you. How are things?
Hi, Mark. Yes, very good. We've been incredibly busy.
Good to hear. Well, there's a few things to catch up on. First of all, of course, the news from the most recent news, which is the resource upgrade. So 37.8% increase, you say there, and this is regarding the fracture potential of the basement and heavy tree formation at Mt Winter. So let's just talk about that a moment. I mean, 37.8% is a pretty significant increase. How have you managed to be able to confidently announce that?
So we engaged an independent specialist, a consultant. Certainly when they reprocessed the seismic and they started looking at a whole lot of attendant information that resource profiling came from, they started to get a sense of the fact that, because initially our whole prognosis is the penetration of the heavy tree. But of course, what everybody forgot is that the Amadeus Basin has huge prospectivity for fractured porosity. And by that I mean, it's not just the heavy tree that hosts the helium, hydrogen and natural gas, it's the fractured granite base. So, and in fact, one of the most famous evidences of that is Mount Kitty in the Amadeus Basin, which they drilled in 2014, and it flowed 500,000 cubic feet of gas a day, 9% helium, 11% hydrogen. So this is not like something that somebody's dreamed up in the back room. This is based on a considerable amount of resource, based on a considerable amount of reprocessing of the seismic, analysing the data, taking all the drilling information from the original well that was drilled, along with all the well logs, to essentially, and then of course, I think as we said before, the size and scale of Mt Winter has significantly increased. And bear in mind that carries for Hussar as well as Mt Winter, because obviously the technology has moved on from when the wells were originally drilled.
Sure. I wonder, before we move on, if you could, I don't know how easy it is to explain or demonstrate with your hands sort of the heavy tree idea, and then how this this fracture area fits into that.
Well, essentially the heavy tree is like a dome that sits over and essentially traps the helium, hydrogen and natural gas. And particularly helium and hydrogen are the smallest molecular structure of known gases, so they'll pass through anything except a salt cavity. But at the same time, below that and above that, there's fractured granite, and that houses the same gases and it traps it within the fractured. The porosity of that gas means, or that structure means, that fractured granitite, which is similar to the basement, the Amadeus Basin, that's what houses, we now know, helium, hydrogen and natural gas and petroleum. So it's a combination of what's happened is that over time, the thinking behind the heavy tree in the case of Amadeus, or the Townsend formation in the case of Hussar, is not just the trap zone or the salt cavern. It's also the fractured porosity structures above it and below it which house the gas.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you've got a good handle on what the geology and the ground is like there. And I know we talked before, you're advancing multiple work streams here. It's great to have the increased resource there, but how do we actually get it out of the ground? So at Mt Winter, you've submitted everything, have you? As a CELC, Central Land Council, that you had to do?
So aside from the issue with our audited accounts, which I think by and large the community thought that we would just stop dead in our tracks. The fact are, no, we didn't have more than adequate funding to complete all this work. So we pursued accelerating the application process for Mount Winter on the basis that we already had an inside track on the information that we published in the announcement today. So essentially we lodged the well re-entry program, the concept well designed for well 1, the concept well was designed for well 3, and that's another story. An overview of the proposed work we're going to do on the access roads, the drilling pad location, the camp location and the site location, an environmental management plan, cultural and heritage considerations. We did all of the work that we're doing that we've done at Hussar as part of the documentation to go within the ALRA, which is the Aboriginal Land Rights Act agreement. Once all that's done, what we're hoping is that when the ALRA, when the grant is given, we've basically satisfied all the requirements for re-entry at Mount Winter. The key element to that is there isn't just one well at Mount Winter, there's 3, and they're all drilled. We had originally only focused on 1, but we're now also looking at the other wells to see if sequentially we can re-enter those, depending on the outcomes.
Okay.
So the crews, both Aztec, our engineers, the consultant, independent consultant geologists and specialists have been working pretty hard to bring all this together while we work towards ultimately re-entering both Hussar and Mount Winter.
And then on Hussar, then have you got all the paperwork submitted for that? Are you waiting for drilling approvals on that one with De Meers?
So we've essentially got, I think, our announcement on Monday. Mm-hmm. We've got drilling approval for an updated approval for 2 elements to our drilling approval application. There's a third element which we're waiting for, and as we said in our announcement, literally the day that this announcement was due to go out, I got another request from DMPE, because they've now no longer called DEMAs.
Okay.
They're now called the Department of Mining, Petroleum and Exploration. Okay? So their name, in the last 48 hours, they've actually changed their name. They're actually called the Department of Mines, Petroleum and Exploration, DMPE. Okay. And they notified us that some of what we provided to them, they required further clarification. So when their announcement went out, I think we said we were providing answers to those questions, which is what we're doing. We've done all that, and now we're just waiting for the response back from them as to where we're at. But we're again very close to granting of the full permit.
The full permit. And is that the last thing you need to then get active?
Correct. Okay. One thing that everybody really needs to understand is, because we have an access agreement with the Indigenous community, we can't just rock up to site and do things. We have to submit what we're doing, we have to gain approval, and then we have to have permission to access the land. So we can't just drive up there and do the airstrip or do the roads or build the camp or do anything. We can't do any of that because the drilling permit approval is not in place. And our agreement well and truly covers that, and we have an obligation to the Indigenous communities. So while it's frustrating, I'm sure, for investors and shareholders that they think, why aren't we up there doing things? It's because we can't. We're not allowed to under the terms of our agreement.
And is it fair to say that Hussar is closer to getting you being able to be active on the ground than
Yes,
Mount Winter?
absolutely. Yeah. We're literally not far away. I mean, I can't second guess what the department will ask us. We've answered their questions and queries. And bear in mind, these are not just answers from the technical side of the Department of Mines, Petroleum and Exploration. These also include the CDNS, which is the Central Desert Native Title Services, which are the people that represent the Indigenous community. So they have some questions as well, because we're moving around on their ground, particularly when it relates to water and roads and disturbing the surface.
Okay, well, that all makes sense. I'm going to ask you probably can't answer it, tell me to go away, but when would you hope to be able to get on the ground at Hussar?
I think it's imminent. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I know back in December I said that we would have 14 days, and true to their word, they did process our application in 14 days when I said. Of course, I should have probably taken a course of meteorology, because we had a once-in-a-100-year weather event which pretty much shot us in the foot. Subsequent to that then, of course, we also had the issue of the enlarged area, which we didn't account for in our original application. So we've literally had to go back to square one and redo it all for the whole area. But I'm pretty confident that with the latest round of requests and information that they had, that we have answered them. And so it's imminent, I would suspect.
Okay. And just finally then, how are you looking on the funding front then, for funding current activities, but then indeed when you can actually get on the ground, how are things looking?
We're fine. Everything's being funded from our current cash reserves. So, no, we're fine.
Okay. Well, Tony Hamilton, CEO of Georgina Energy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mark. And hopefully I'll be able to talk to you again shortly about the drilling approval.
Look forward to it, Tony.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.